Hi, my name is Sharon and today I'm going to demonstrate how to make monkey bread biscuits. Now you're probably familiar with monkey bread. You could be, because it's like lumps of dough that you cook and you can break apart and eat, but you're probably more familiar with those with sweet caramel or sugar on them some kind. Today we're going to make savory, which is really just more spicy or salty. So the first thing I do when I get a new recipe is I read it 2 times completely through, because one of the worst things you can do is be in the middle of cooking or baking and realize you don't have the right ingredients. So I do that first. Next, I get out all the utensils I'm going to need, whether knives, cutting board, measuring cups, everything. And any of you who've taken the 4-course living classes here at the Extension Center are familiar with this process. When you come, you see a demonstration, everything is ready for you. Makes it very handy. If I'm going to bake something, I automatically set the oven right away. You should not put anything in the oven until it reaches the temperature that it says on the recipe. This one was 425, which I have set to 425. Now after I do all that, that's when I usually wash my hands. Now you can do it before, but I always figure the knobs and handles in the kitchen aren't the cleanest. So what I'm going to do is wash my hands for about 20 seconds very thoroughly. You want to make sure the water is warm. It does not have to be hot, but it should be warm. And then, you know, the routine of trying to say happy birthday, or you can count to 20 in your head or whatever. And make sure you do your wrist, up your wrist. If you have long fingernails, it's good to have a brush. My nails aren't very long. Then once you feel you get to that 20 seconds, then make sure you dry them very, very thoroughly. Now I've done that, I'm ready to go. And the first thing I'm going to do is open up this canister of biscuits. Now this is a 5 count. You can actually get them in 10 or 12, I think, some of them maybe 8. But this you want 5, and make sure you get the regular and not the grams, which are larger for this particular recipe. So once you pull the paper off, you can take kind of an end of a fork or something, hit the little black line there and just poke it, and it'll come off very easily. Now I'm going to open this, and I just realized I should have had a cutting board for this. I'm going to have someone run and get a cutting board. You have to excuse me. I'm new at this, so I'm going to be kind of the one that I'm learning from you as much as you're learning from me. But anyway, what you're going to do is lay out the 5 biscuits. Now we're going to cut each biscuit into 6 parts as equal as possible. Now if you have a pair of cooking shears that you use, or scissors that you use solely for cooking, go use those. It makes it very easy. Do not grab a pair out of a room, another room, and use it. If you don't have them, just use a knife. So what I do is I cut it in half, and each half I cut into as equal parts as I can. It doesn't have to be perfect, like I said, but you want to make sure that you get them as equal as you can. And see how nicely these shears work. They do work wonderful. I would suggest if you don't have a pair, that would be a good Christmas gift for you, for someone to get you. Now after I get these all cut up, you're going to notice that the recipe calls for 6 biscuits, and yet I have just 5 piles here because there's only 5 biscuits. So the next step is I've got to make 6 piles, and what I'm going to do is steal 1 piece from each of the 5 biscuits. And so each of the piles will have 5 pieces in them and be 6 biscuits. So make sure there's 5 in each one. Okay, so what I have here is 5 piles of 6 piles of 5 pieces each. So the next thing I'm going to do is mix olive oil. You're going to use 1½ tablespoons of olive oil. Get the half table. I know it's the orange one. I've used them enough from these. And after you pour the olive oil in there, the next step, according to the recipe, is to use 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. So, find the teaspoon, try to make it as level as possible, mix that in there, and then you're going to use 1/4 of a teaspoon of Italian seasoning. As you can see, there is very few ingredients in this, which makes it, in my opinion, an extra special recipe. Now, I like to use a whisk when I'm using oils and mixing ingredients. You can use a fork, that works perfectly well too, but the whisk is kind of my favorite thing to use. So after I've mixed them, the next thing I'm going to do is put them. Now, if you got you never even have to oil these, even if this isn't one that's stick-proof, so to speak. You don't have to spray it in because you're going to be covering these in oil. So, first one, you can use a slotted spoon, but make sure you get the extra oil off. It makes it a little harder, I think. So I just use 2. And you don't have to be very neat. Remember, in monkey bread, the good thing about monkey bread is it's supposed to look kind of lumpy and everything. It's kind of a fun bread to make. You can just tear it apart and eat it. Now, midway through, if it looks like it's separating, mix it again. Keep those, because you want to make sure they all get all this ingredients on them. I showed my granddaughter how to do this. She's 11, and she thought it was really great fun to make this. And my grandson even liked them, and he's kind of picky. Now, I'm oily. My hands aren't that filthy, but I'm going to go over and just rinse and get the extra oil off my hands. The last step is putting a topping on them, and it calls for 1 tablespoon of Parmesan cheese. Now, you can buy the cheese in a block. It's often a triangle, and grate it yourself. But I would suggest using this that's already packaged. It could be any brand, and I do refrigerate mine after. I'm not sure it says to do that, but I would suggest that you refrigerate it. So what you're going to do is get a tablespoon, and you're going to sprinkle it over. You may want to use your fingers, depends on how adept you are. I find it kind of a little easier to take my finger and try to get it as evenly as possible over all the biscuits. Is to put some more Italian seasoning. Now, it doesn't tell you specifically how much to use, but remember, you're not frosting these things with it. Don't get carried away, but definitely you want to sprinkle a little more. Again, this doesn't have one of those with holes in it, I think, so I'm going to put some in my hand so I don't get too much. You can, when I do a new recipe, I make it as consistent as the recipe calls for, as exact as it does. Even with this, I'm kind of guessing. And then if I don't like it or want to improve on it, I can put a note there saying next time add a little more of the seasoning. So now they're ready to bake. It says here 8 to 10 minutes. Always bake at the lowest temperature. Why? Because ovens they kind of have different, they're not set exactly, they have different personalities, if you will, like people do. Some get hotter than others, and if you put it in there for 10 minutes, you could burn them. So we're going to put them in for 8 minutes, and I'm going to check them. If they're golden brown, I'm going to take them out. If they're still a little pale, I'm going to leave them in at about 30-second intervals, and at least by 10 minutes, remove them. I put mine in the middle rack unless it tells you to do separately. You should put it about in the middle oven and then set the timer. Okay, I checked it at 8 minutes and it was perfect. You will notice I would say let them sit in the pan for at least 5 minutes. They have set a little longer. And as I was telling you, they break apart to eat them. They're just absolutely wonderful. Now, if you don't finish all of them, they will freeze pretty well. Most foods, their texture, taste can alter after freezing. I don't think it'll affect these a lot, but if you freeze them, the most important thing is make sure they're completely cool. If you don't get them cool, you'll put plastic wrap on them and they'll get little beads of water, and if that freezes in there, that will change the texture. So make sure they're cool. You can wrap them one at a time in plastic or several together. Put them in an airtight container. Now what I like to do, this recipe says they're good up to 3 months in the freezer. I like to use a piece of masking tape and I write the use by date. So this is the 13th, it would be January 13th, 2022. I would write use by January 13th, 2022. And the reason I do that, then I know I should eat it by that date. Now they won't go bad or make you sick if you wait longer, but they start losing their flavor and texture if you wait too long. Now one thing, the last thing I want to tell you is never freeze the dough before it's cooked. It has yeast in it and it becomes inactive when it's frozen. And that just means it won't do its job. So instead of having these lovely puffed up kind of biscuits, you're gonna have something that looks like a hockey puck, which may be fun to play with, but not fun to eat. So don't do that. Now I hope you'll try this recipe. It was very easy, it's fun, and I think you're gonna find it quite delicious.
Hi, this is Jean and this is Sharon.
Hi.
And we sure miss all you 4-course living students. We're hoping it won't be too long before you'll be in this classroom with us. But right now it's October, and October is cooler weather, and it is when you start thinking about soup. So today we are going to create a soup. Before you watch this video, I want you to turn it off and make sure that you have printed out the recipe that is online for Create a Soup. It doesn't have pictures, but it has all the directions on it. So, give you a chance to do that, just stop the video and print off the recipe. All right, now, what we're doing is all these ingredients are things that I pulled from a food pantry. This Create a Soup gives you a chance to use up all the extra things in your food pantry. Or if you're at the grocery store, you can buy the things that you would like. Or if you're at a food pantry, you can get some of the things that they have. Because most of the ingredients, except for the spices, are things that most food pantries have, and they're pretty inexpensive at any grocery store. So if you look at your recipe, the first thing it says to do is in a large pot, cook your onions, and instead of using oil or anything, it tells you to use water or broth. We're going to use water, and it says 1/4 cup of water. We both have washed our hands, yes.
Absolutely.
Before we got started. So make sure you do that too. Sharon already showed you how to wash hands. So we have done that. Now, first thing we're going to do is cook onions. I'm going to show you a couple. You can chop up an onion if you have one at home. You could use a fresh onion, shortcuts from most grocery store delis have shortcuts. They're already chopped up and you just dump them in. The issue I have with them is that they're pretty expensive. Another easy way is frozen chopped onions, and they're only for, this says 2 medium onions, it's a little over $1, $1.50, I think, something like that. We're going to use frozen onions. So put about half that in there for me, and you need to turn the oven, okay, just dump it in. Yep, that's good. Thank you. All right, we're gonna wait. It's gonna get started, but while the onions are cooking, the next thing it says on the recipe is to choose 1 or more vegetables. We're using all cans. You could use fresh, you could use frozen. Canned vegetables are just as nutritious as frozen and fresh. They are a lot less expensive. So what we decided, the things I pulled, I happen to have some corn, and I like corn, so I want corn in my soup. Also, I have green beans, and I like green beans in my soup. And One other thing I happen to have that nobody likes in my family is mixed vegetables, but in soup, nobody complains about it. So we're going to use up the mixed vegetables from my food pantry. Now, two other things that I found mushrooms, but mushrooms are not necessarily, some people don't like mushrooms in their vegetable soup. So, and we're making basically a vegetable soup. The other one that I had were some peas, and you really have to check with people to see if they like peas. And one thing I found with peas, especially canned, is sometimes they get mushy and kind of fall apart in the soup. So I decided I have a choice. They said to use one or more. I did use 3 cans of vegetables. I think that's enough for this soup that we're going to have. All right, the next thing it says on our recipe right here is to choose one protein. Now, a protein could be a meat. It could be what I have canned meat. You could use canned, you can use fresh, you could use frozen meat. The thing about canned meat is it's all cooked. We're going to use canned chicken, and canned chicken comes 2 ways. This is chunk chicken, and this is chunk chicken. I know this looks like Spam, but we're going to open it to see. This one I got from the food pantry, and I was just curious what it was like, but it would work really well. They also had this kind of chicken. And it's just chunks of chicken. There we go. And we'll see what this one. And in this, there's juice. I forgot to tell you we drained all the vegetables beforehand. So I'm going to go over here to the sink and drain the chicken. So I'm going to show you this chunk chicken is kind of in a little package. And so what Sharon will have to do with her spoon is kind of chop it up. Now another choice we have, there is canned beef, but I kind of like chicken better in my vegetable soup. And there is ham, you could use ham. And one thing that people don't think about is that beans, and I've got some beans here, can be either a protein or they could be a starch. Now, in our soup, it's going to be the beans are going to be a starch because we have chicken in our soup. So, the next thing we have is a starch. Now, I did not find any canned potatoes, but you could have used regular potatoes. That would be fine. I'm going to use, these are Great Northern beans. They're a white bean, so we're going to put that in. And then we're going to use black beans just to add another color to it. Now, with black beans, we're going to need to drain them and you need to rinse them. Just dump it in. What I usually do is take water, just pour it over. The juices that are in the black beans are pretty dark, and so it can affect the color of your soup. Okay, Sharon, I'm going to just dump these.
I think we need to turn it up.
Then do it.
Okay.
It's going to have a lot more liquid in just a little bit.
Okay.
There's that. The next thing, and one of the things Sharon just said, we need to turn down the soup because there's not much liquid in here. So we need to look at a broth base or a base. And one of the things that it says, we're going to need 4 cups. We're going to use, these are some other beans that we had. I only used 2 beans, that's plenty. So first we're going to have diced tomatoes, because I think diced tomatoes really are good. There. And you don't drain the tomatoes. You want all that good juice in there. Now, I happen to have diced tomatoes that have basil, garlic, and oregano in it, just because I think in soup that's nice. And we're gonna put 2 cans of that. Then it says, if we use 2 cans of diced tomatoes, we also need 2 to 3 cups of broth. 2 cups, and we may add more if we need to. I think I'm gonna add we're gonna use 4 cups of broth because it doesn't look like it looks like it's pretty thick in there. It's real thick, which is fine, but we need to, so I'm gonna put a couple more. Now, we want this to come up to boiling. I think 1 more.
Okay, now we turn the fire up so we'll come to a boil.
Because we did not use broth, I'm using what's called bouillon cubes. And one of these, they're just as good as using a can of broth or a box of broth. They're not any harder to use, and they're so much less expensive. So you have to undo these, and you just, one of these little cubes is a cup of water. And we put 4 cups in there. So one of the things I have found, there's 1, is that sometimes I like it a little bit brothier, so I will put a couple extra in there. But that's, so we'll get these put in there, and they will dissolve as the water boils. You know, it's amazing to me, don't you wonder how a machine can wrap these up so well and they don't have any goo or anything on them. But, you know, the nice part about bouillon cubes, another thing is they don't get old. You can just use them whenever you need to. You also have a choice of what's called a soup base, which comes in a container like this, and you just kind of scoop it out. It's a teaspoon for each cup. But this time I used the least expensive. Now, the next thing that we're gonna need after I get this last bouillon cube is we need some herbs. They say choose some seasonings. One thing about bouillon cubes, they're gonna have a lot of sodium or salt in them, so you're not gonna need salt. They say put 2 to 3 teaspoons of dried herbs. One of the things that I like to use in almost all my vegetable type soup is a bay leaf. And all you do with the bay leaf is just throw it in. And once it's cooked, and if you have a small leaf, sometimes I'll put 2. Then I have to pick. Now, I have some cumin, which is kind of like a chili. You use it in chili sometimes, plus chili powder. And there's some garlic powder. And what I do with the garlic powder, I'm just going to shake a little bit in there because I think it, but I'm not going to bother to measure it. Just a little bit. I do not care for cumin or chili in my vegetable soup. So I'm sticking to basil, leaf basil, and oregano. And since it says 2 to 3, another one I happen to have on hand was rosemary. So we're just going to put a teaspoon of each of these in the soup. And we are finished with, we have now created our soup. And we're gonna put the lid on and we're gonna bring it to a boil. And just, here, let me just, and in a few minutes we're gonna show you a dish of the soup that we just created. It took us probably 20 minutes to mix up the soup. Now, because everything in this soup is cooked, you don't have to worry about cooking a long time. What I find is you can heat it up, get it boiling, do it for 5 or 10 minutes, you can eat it. I will say, once you've kept it in the refrigerator overnight or another day, it just gets better each time. And that's because the seasoning that we put in there has a chance to flavor, to give it a flavor. Okay, I hope that you, if you make the soup, will send an email to me and tell me how it was and some of the ingredients that you used. All right, here is the finished product of our soup, and we have all sampled it and it really tastes good. And here's our monkey bread that just goes right with our vegetable soup, chicken vegetable soup. Now, one of the things I forgot to mention on the Create a Recipe, it mentions you could use a pasta or rice as your starch. I wanted you to see, I do not usually use a pasta or rice. Pasta, after you have cooked it a while, the noodles get mushy and kind of break up, so I prefer not to use them. Sometimes I'll use the rice, but it soaks up all the juices as you keep it overnight, and then you have to add more broth and more water and everything, and I just don't think it adds anything. So I wanted you to see what a pretty soup we have, that you don't need pasta, you don't need rice. We've got everything in it, and I'll tell you, we've already had 2 or 3 people come in from the office, and they all came because the smell was good and then said the taste was good. So, hope you will make and create your own soup. Hope to see you soon. Thanks.